My name is Ellen Graves. I'd like to welcome all of you this evening to this wonderful event, these wonderful panelists who are giving up their time. I'm a board member of the Reston Museum, and I'd like to introduce some of our other board members. We have Ann Youngren. Ann, stand up. We have Ed Robichaux, who's in the control room. We have Lillian Gall, and we have one of our panelists, Paul Thomas, who's on our board. We have a wonderful panel tonight, and Joe and Marcia, thank you for joining us. I'll let you be the silver line. Well, this is the third program sponsored by the museum to recognize and to celebrate Black history and our diversity. Our first program, a wonderful author, Deborah Parker, who has written 4 books, had a book signing at the museum, and then last Saturday night, and I really feel bad for those of you who missed this, but we had the wonderful divas back with us again. And in fact, we have one of the divas in the audience tonight. Two, I'm sorry. And they were just absolutely marvelous, and no one knew, and everyone's talking about it, Minda, no one knew that you were such a whistler. But Beverly did the narration, and Minda whistled on Move Indigo. It was absolutely fabulous. I just feel very, very badly that we did not tape it, but it was really, really wonderful. I want to recognize Susan, our wonderful administrative person. And here comes the man on the hour end, our wonderful Bob Simon. I'd like to introduce our facilitator, and before I get started on that, I'd like to remind all of us of a very big event on April 5th, Founders Day, right here at Lake Ann Village Center, right here in the plaza. It will start at 12 noon and will end approximately at 3 p.m. We will be celebrating Reston's 50th anniversary and our very own Bob Simon's 100th birthday. We're going to have a program, we're going to have cake, we're going to have lemonade, and we're just going to have a wonderful time. And you're all invited, so please invite your friends. So, without any further ado, if you want to send a message to Bob, it's online, and we also have some forms over on the table. So please do not hesitate to pick up one of those forms and send a message to Bob, because I'm sure he'll have plenty of time to read all of your wonderful messages. So, our wonderful facilitator, and Tom was our facilitator last year. He has lived in Reston for 43 years. Came over with me, but I like him. He and his wife, Minda, they've certainly been involved in our community as volunteers since moving to Reston in 1971. They have 2 adult children, Pamela and Britt, and they completed their elementary, middle school, and high school in Reston. Tom recently was appointed the executive director of the nonprofit Family and Youth Advocacy Center based in Reston. This organization develops programs and projects to improve the lives and self-sufficiency of all Fairfax County families. Please join me in welcoming our facilitator, Tom Ahart.
I'd like to sit if you folks don't mind. It's easier for me to read this small print. I want to share just one aside with Ellen as came over with the Mayflower. When we were contemplating moving to Reston back in 1971, we talked to our former Michiganders who were living in the Washington, D.C. area. And we got the sage advice from them. No matter where you live, don't move across the bridge. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And then I discovered that living in Virginia and working in Washington, D.C., we had to go across the bridge. And they were suggesting that we not move to Reston. But now I want to get my little prepared remarks. I want to thank the Reston Museum for inviting me to serve as the moderator for the second annual event held during Black History Month. Last year, some of you will recall the panelists were individuals who were old enough to be the parents of this year's panel. And in fact, is a parent of two of the panelists? Or what? But I also want to thank Bob Simon, and I'm pleased that he's here, to thank Bob for the care in which he planned for the Reston community to be one that welcomed all individuals to come and work. That was very important in our decision to move to Reston. And we have called our program Millennium+1. And we did some heavy research by going to Google and learned that millennials, or this generation, is also known as the Generation Y. And we wanted to include and make certain that we had on the panel those folks and young folks who not only live here now, but essentially grew up in Reston. Because we felt it important that they share some of their ideas and thoughts, not only about their experiences growing up in Reston, but also serve as a word, prognosticators, of giving us some view of what their perspective is that Reston will look like in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And we try to make sure that we span that generation from the 1960s to the 1980s. And like I said, our panelists are those who lived in Reston during the 1960s and 1970s. We have given them a difficult assignment. We have asked them to share with us their remembrances of growing up in Reston. We've also asked them to share their thoughts on what Reston will look like during the next 20 plus years. When my family and I moved to Reston in 1971, I remember being told that Reston had 3,300 residents in 1971. And again, doing some Googling today, at the Fairfax County Economic Development Association. And by the way, one of your good friends, Young, what's his first name at our church? Who moved away was Bill Young is now back working at the Fairfax County Economic Development Administration. But anyway, and doing my research, I learned that as of 2010, Reston had a population of 58,404 residents. It had 2,390 employers and a total of 58,936 jobs. And that was dated, I think, April 10th of 2010. And I suspect that it's grown a little bit since then in terms of number of employers and number of employees. But that's quite a growth. And I recently read that 1/3 of Reston residents live and work in Reston. And I think that's a testimony to the wonderful job that Bob Simon did in laying the groundwork and continuing interest in the framework of how Reston will develop in the future. We have given, that's my opening remarks, a bit longer than I thought it would read, but it's okay. The first question we asked our panel to consider is growing up in Reston. But I think each of you should give some introductory remarks about yourself. And I'd like to just start with you and then go down the line.
Is this on already? Yes. I don't like microphones. I'm Katie Eichler-Jones. I am the new, somewhat new, Executive Director at the Reston Museum. I was born here, so I've lived here for 35 years. and my parents still live here. My husband grew up here, raising my family here. So I look forward to answering these questions as part of this panel, and maybe meeting a lot of you afterwards. And if you haven't come by the Reston Museum lately, stop by. You can meet me on Mondays and Tuesdays.
I'm Vanessa Johnson. I also moved here at a young age, and I went to Terracet, Hunter's Woods, Langston Hughes, and South Lakes, and I moved away for about 13 years, and I came back recently, well, not that recently, about 9 years ago. It seems fast, and I work here as well. I have a clothing label, Vaness Hands, which is my sweater. I designed it. Thank you. And yeah, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. Wonderful. Okay. It's just wonderful to see you all and to have been invited this evening.
Hi, my name is Lisa Sechart-Ehrhardt. I moved here with my family. I'm kicking and screaming. In 1975, I didn't want to come here. The first thing my mother brought me to was the open air market Saturday mornings, and I fell in love with Reston. And now it's 38 years later, and I've made Reston my home. I've raised my children here. My husband came here later, but he lives here in Reston, and we love it. This is a great place. So I know many faces here. I know all the different. I still call them village centers, and I don't like to call it North and South Reston. It's Reston. It's very much home. So I've been here quite a long time.
I'm Paul Thomas. Moved here with my parents in '68, and actually, I think Lisa and I are the two who are too old to have gone to Langston Hughes, but went to Hunter's Woods and intermediate in South Lakes, and now my wife, who also grew up in Reston, and I are raising our kids here.
I'm Lindsay Trout, and I moved here. My parents divorced when I was about 8, and we moved from McLean to Reston. It was the best thing that ever happened to us. Since then, I left for 4 years to go to college and have been here ever since. When I came back after college, I was teaching in Fairfax County in Herndon and coaching at South Lakes, and a handful of years later, I started teaching at South Lakes, then became an administrator at South Lakes, and now I'm in my second year as the principal of Terracet Elementary, where I went as a student. So I went to Terracet, Hughes, and South Lakes, and I refuse to call it a JOB because it's way more than that, so I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you all very much. Am I on? Do you hear me? Yeah. Yes. One of the things that we asked our panelists to think about as they pondered the questions that we had given them was what were the, reflect in your responses on the 7 founding principles of Reston as Bob Simon has enunciated over the years. And the first that we recorded was Reston, we wanted to provide a wide range of cultural and recreational facilities as well as an environment for privacy. That Reston it be possible for anyone to remain in a single neighborhood throughout their life, providing the fullest range of housing, styles, and prices, resulting in a varied community. The third was that the importance and dignity of each individual be a focal point for all planning and take precedence for large-scale concepts. The fourth was that the people be able to live and work in the same community. Fifth was that commercial, cultural, and recreational facilities be made available to the residents from the outset of the development and not years later. The sixth was that beauty, structural and natural, is a necessity of the good life and should be fostered during Reston. And the seventh, and I guess one of the most important, was that Reston be financial success. This is an aside, Robert. I hope that you're reflecting on this and saying that you've accomplished all seven. Thank you. I'd like to begin. We'll just go right down the panel for each and ask each panelist to respond to the questions. The first is just growing up in Reston and based upon your experiences, what were you anticipate Reston will look like in 10, 15, or 20 years in the future?
Can you hear me? This is a much better microphone. I think this is a really exciting question because I have no idea what it's going to look like in 10, 15, or 20 years now that the Silver Line is actually coming and it's going to be here for real. They've been talking about it for so long, I can't actually believe it's a reality. I'm not going to believe it until I see the first person actually get on the train. But I think this is a really exciting thing because my daughter now is 5, so in 10 years she'll be in high school. And what's Reston going to be in 10 years? I hope it's going to be bigger and better, and all of those founding principles will still be something that we're thinking about. What I hope doesn't happen is we lose sight of what Reston is and what makes it special. Because I think we're going to see a huge growth in population and a huge growth in the number of jobs, which could be great, and it can also be really scary if we don't keep in mind where we're coming from and what makes Reston different than a lot of other places in Northern Virginia and the DC area. So what do I see Reston being in 10, 15, or 20 years? I wish I knew. I wish I had a good answer for that. But I hope something even better, bigger, better, but still Reston. Because I want my daughter to want to stay here too, because I see how fantastic it is to raise them around my parents. I would love for her to do the same thing, because I see myself staying here forever. We live in Lakeport off of Lake Thoreau, and I see us staying there until I can't climb the stairs anymore. So, and then after that, I'll move to, Thoreau Place. But that's what I hope, that it's a place that she'll want to remain too, so that we can continue this tradition of staying right here.
As far as the future is concerned, I think it's interesting because I moved here from Manhattan. Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay. So I moved here from Manhattan, and I moved to the Reston Town Center area, and so it was interesting that the correlation I saw between the communities, because basically from Reston Town Center you can living in North Reston, you can walk to the library, you can walk to movies, you can walk to restaurants, you can walk to a lot of different places, and there is well, I guess we're going to discuss later about the economic cap or the economics of the situation, but you're able to really have a great quality of life in Reston, and as far as the future is concerned, in Town Center, and as far as the future is concerned, I think it's going to look a lot like Manhattan with the Silver Line arriving. It's just to me, I think it's an inevitability that it will eventually be very congested. But I noticed that also there's urban art springing up. Culture is kind of springing up in unexpected places here in Reston. So and it's all around us tonight. And so I think you can take a bit of a matter, but it'll be a good thing.
I have a little bit. Can you hear me with this? I have a little bit of different idea what it might look like in 10 years. But one of the things I love about Reston is the open space and the green. I grew up in a Navy family, a military child, so moved around every 2 years. When I first came here, I didn't like it. But what I like about Reston is that it's very community oriented and people interact. So if you went to a village center, you could walk to it, you knew people, and there were people a long time, and people were very friendly. So even as Reston's grown, if you've been here for a long time, people are very inviting here, and I don't think that happens in a lot of different places. What I like about here, there is a lot of diversity. It's not just a word, it's everywhere. You see diversity just in this room here, but you see it in the schools, you see it in the shopping malls, and you see it wherever you go, and that just doesn't happen. One of the things I noticed when I left here to go away to college and go other places, and the kids that are in schools now, they go away, they say, what happened to the diversity? We can take it as second nature here, but there's very few communities around this country that are diverse as Reston. So I'm hoping it stays somewhat the same. I know it'll get busier, but I think the small town feel that Reston has, I think that will stay here, because I think the people that call Reston home are not going to let a lot of that change. Whenever something change is inevitable, but whenever things start to change in Reston, there's always a lot of, hey, wait a minute, there are some principles here. And so I think a lot of that will still take place, even with the silver line coming and all the other things. There's still the small town feel, and that this is a place you call home.
First of all, I agree with a lot of what's already been said. Certainly from the last, say, 30 years, a lot has changed in Reston with the onset of the town center and everything. But still, there's a lot that's the same. The woods behind my house and the creek behind my house are the same woods and creek that were behind the house I moved to in '68. And that area, aside from the improved quality of the creek restoration, is still very much the same. And so I have confidence that there'll be some aspects that are very similar, that the village center still being a magnet, the inclusiveness, the open spaces that were so brilliantly planned. But then again, with the arrival of the Silver Line and all the building that's going to happen in that corridor, this is an opportunity for either essentially another Reston to sprout up in the middle of Reston, so we can end up sort of this urban core that becomes its own separate thing, that is bounded on the south by Sunrise Valley and on the north by Sunset Hills, and it becomes its own thing. Or it can become a magnet that pulls people from around Reston into it, and that's a very exciting opportunity that's in front of us.
When I'm either at national conferences, education conferences, or just talking among principals in Fairfax County, describing Terracet to them, I often describe it very succinctly by saying, the best part about my school is I can stand on the corner, even though we're underground, I can go up to the ground level and stand on a corner of the property and throw a rock one way and hit subsidized housing, and throw a rock another way and hit $750,000 homes. And that's the absolute best thing about my school. There aren't many schools outside of Reston, there aren't many fellow principals that I work with who can say the same thing outside of Reston. The Reston people can all relate, but outside of Reston, they can't relate to that concept of that composition of students. What comes with that is that the people who are in Reston are here because that's the environment they want to be in. And so what I think about when I think about 15, 20, 10, 15 years from now is that I want people to be here not because this is where they work, and by default this is where they want to live, but by default this is where they have to live. Rather, I hope they're here because this is what they want to be surrounded with, is this diversity and this richness of human resource and human beings. And I hope that doesn't change. So I hope the latter of your options is the one that happens, that people come here and just develop and build what we already have rather than being a standalone metro mini Reston.
Great. Well, thank you all. I think that your views are shared by all of us in this room. I want to go back to your growing up. When you were growing up, what were some of your favorite cultural and recreational activities that you participated in here in Reston? And what do you do now, yourself and your children, in your opinion, enjoying the amenities of the community? And what do you think is missing? And I'd like to start by saying, after watching the Olympics, I think we may need a skateboarding someplace in Reston pretty soon.
We have one. We have Lake Fairfax.
Where?
Lake Fairfax. I got a ski mountain. Can we get a snowboard halfway? What was it? What were they all running at each other and falling?
Oh, the
Cross. Yes, let's get one of those. That's right. Growing up for me, there wasn't much room for anything other than golf in my family. We did a lot of golf. So much so that I don't golf so much anymore as I used to. But we did a lot, and in Reston that's possible. There's 2 golf courses here. It's a small town to have 2 golf courses, but I'm very familiar with both of them, and they're both beautiful. Now I have a chance, now that I'm not golfing so much, I let my dad do that. Now I have a chance to actually do some of the other things, and I have for the past 5 or 6 years taken pottery class right here at Lake Ann I started with my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law. We did it together. My mother-in-law quickly learned that she did not have the patience for it, but now my sister-in-law and I still do it together every Monday. And I've always participated in kind of the visual arts classes that are available here. It's something that was very important in my family. My children, my daughter does, this isn't in Reston, but they've been around a long time, and they're just across in Herndon. Gemini? You guys know Gemini? They're closing. They're closing. But she's doing gymnastics at Gemini, and she also takes swim classes at the community center in Hunters Woods, and she loves that. And we obviously use the pools, right? Everybody uses the pools. And one of the reasons I love living here is that we can walk to the pool. We don't have to get in the car and have to stay there for 2 or 3 hours to make the most of our money. We can walk over there and we can stay there for 20 minutes if we want to. And we can do that every day because that's how close we live to the pool. And it's wonderful to be able to do that. I think Reston is very unique in that way. That there's so many different things that you can do so affordably, I think.
Can I interrupt for just one second? Would you, when you retire that mic, it's not the best one, and Bob can't hear every word, so.
Hello?
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, as far as actually currently, I flip-flop, Katie and I did, because I golf now. I never golfed before. I thought I hated golfing, but as an adult, I developed an aptitude for it, so I love it. Just currently I do a lot of walking. I live next to near the WNOD trail, so there's always something new on that trail. It's wonderful if you love nature. Let's see. Well, I have been to McCormick and Schmick's after 11 p.m. If you know what goes on there, then you know what I do there. And let's see. I'll go up to town center from time to time. And as far as as a child, my parents had me involved in everything. She mentioned Gemini, and I went to Gemini and Specs, and I did jazz and African dance with Miss Terrelline Terry, and I did roller skating. There was a roller skating rink here. Lots of great memories. I was a debutante. Just a lot of wonderful memories associated with growing up here. I don't find there to be a lack of activities here. There's just something for everyone, and you just find your niche.
That's so true about Reston. I'm very active and outdoors. One of the things I remember, I know they talk about global warming, and I do believe it's happening, but a long time ago, for those of you who've been a long time, Lake Ann actually used to freeze. Now, I never skated there, but I skated on many of the golf course ponds, and Hunters Woods, the old Hunters Woods Shopping Center, had a little skating rink in the middle. I skated there. Did a lot of walking on the trails, and back then people rode bikes a lot in the trails, and there you find frogs and things in the woods. Now I don't want to go and do that stuff, but I did a lot of things in Reston that you could just walk and go to anywhere. Love the pools. I also love Reston Festival. That was a big deal here, and everybody in Reston seemed to crowd down here on the plaza. And at the time, I worked in the ice cream store, Mr. Bayer's ice cream parlor, and so people would come in there all the time. But there was always something to do in Reston if you wanted to be outside. If you went someplace, you always found someone. I never felt that I was alone. As an adult, we spend a lot of time. One of the neat things about the Reston Community Center, they do things all over Reston. So there's a lot of free concerts, a lot of cultural events. So we go to, whenever we read something in one of the papers, we go all around to the different village centers and pay attention to a lot of those things. And so a lot of them are free. So it's very easy to get your family with a blanket and sit down in one of the plazas and watch it. So we're always very involved. And so the things I did as a younger, I do it now with my family as an adult. And so if you're bored in Reston, then that's your fault.
It's funny though, growing up, I have no memory of anything cultural except the Reston Festival at all. Because we didn't have the beautiful Joanne Rose Gallery, we didn't have the free concerts at Town Center. There were a lot of things that we have now And I don't recall having anything like it when I was growing up. I see my mom already rolling her eyes like, yeah, the cultural here in the early 70s, not so much. The closest thing I've got to culture, aside from the Reston Festival, was watching John Cosham perform at South Lakes High School for the drama or choir or whatever. And by the way, when they did Godspell, awesome. Still remember it. But when it came to recreation, you know, a lot of people are very civilized and they remember being on the paths and at the pool and, okay, fine, I did that. But really, a lot of my time was spent between the paths. It was in the woods, just simply the woods behind our house, in the creek, and I mean in the creek. I don't mean fishing where my line, I mean in the creek. I had a lot of friends. We lived on Gold Cup Lane off Lawyers Road, down the sort of near the southern edge. I had a bunch of friends down off Soapstone, and the quickest way there was straight through the woods. Halloween, greatest holiday of the year. Why? Because I went through the woods to everything. And it was, yes, there were paths and there were nice waypoints, but really it was about the open space. And now, the kids and I, we still go to, and my wife, we go to the pools a lot. The kids are on swim teams, and they're out on the paths and the tot lots and everything. But luckily, they also spend some time just in the woods, and I think that's really great as well. Growing up, I wasn't doing gym and I was doing soccer and various other things, and skating on Lake Thoreau, which back in the olden days, that froze every winter I was in high school. My grades went down second quarter, every time. Because second quarter, I was on the lake, sorry, I was on the lake a lot. And so it was a lot of outdoor stuff and not necessarily the more rigid structural activity.
I don't have a whole lot to add. I'm a golfer, I'm outdoorsy, and we grew up playing soccer and on the swim teams. And the only downside to the wonder of the pools and the access is that you move anywhere and you're like, I have to pay what to go to one pool? And just the whole concept. And we traveled all of Reston all summer long on our bikes. And you just say goodbye to mom in the morning and you came back maybe by dark. The Kyle boys, I don't know if you know Franklin and Frederick Kyle, Marge and those guys, longtime Reston folks. He still lives in the house where he grew up and he's raising his family there. We used to all just get on bikes and we'd get going. And you ended up, at this pool and we'd go visit that pool and it was all by way of the paths. So that is a magic that I'll never forget. And you'd sidetrack to the creeks and, all of those things. But it's what you get used to here. And then I live in Ashburn now, and don't curse me for that, but I've lived here so long, I just can't go anywhere in Reston and be functional because I've known people my whole life here. And I live in Ashburn, and it's not the same. It's beautiful there, but it's just not the same. And I think a lot of it is the ability to get around by way of the paths, the village centers, all of those same things. I had a long time to think of what was missing, and I can't come up with anything. I'll get back to you.
Great. Thank you all for those responses. I think you're, again, sharing the commonality of what we all have grown to love about Reston. Kind of a different kind of question now for you. But based on the rising cost of housing, will Reston continue to be a place where all levels of family income can live?
This is a really tricky question, and I think that it really comes down to how important we think that is. It's got to be something that the community takes up, and I agree with what Lindsay said when she said that Reston is unique in the school system, that you can have such economic diversity within one school, and I loved that growing up, and I love that for my daughter. So I really hope that that's something that we take on as a cause, as a community, because I think that's what it's going to take in order to keep affordable housing in Reston, especially with the incoming metro. So I certainly hope that that's something that we're able to continue over the next generation. But I think that's going to take some work on our part.
Yeah, I also agree. I think it's a community effort. I think that also the affordable housing should be, in creating new units. I think that, there should be more affordable housing. I just think that there should be, I don't know the reason, the economic reasons behind people's motivations, but I'm sure that, some of the people that are essential to the community like firefighters and, educators, people that are essential, they need to be able to have that choice of living in the community. And it shouldn't be, something substandard. It should be, something that, is livable, where, people can, plant gardens and, feel a pride in living there. And then I also think that, there's a community effort, but then there's also the individual effort, which is if you want to stay and you want to, stay entrenched somewhere where the quality of living is high, and the cost of living may follow it, at times there's an individual effort where you have to do, like for me, currently, I have to do 3 steps, and you might have to do 1 step, but we both arrive at the same space, so.
I think it's absolutely essential that there is housing for everybody in Reston, and I'm not going to speak for Mr. Simon, but I think when he said at the beginning, what a beautiful idea that anyone can be here. This is a place for everybody. And you shouldn't have to be only a millionaire or somebody who makes $1 million to live in Reston. And the beauty is, particularly when you raise children or you went to school here, is going to a school and the kids are from all different backgrounds, and the kids are in school and they don't care. I remember when the border issues were happening regarding what kids were coming to Reston to, go to South Lakes. And if you could have been at some of those meetings, with the it was like it was in the 50s or 60s. Don't throw my kids out. They got really crazy. But the parents that spoke from Reston and the high schools who spoke, they said, we came here because we love it. This is the beauty of Reston. Our parents want to be here. We want to be here. And it's not a big deal. And you can learn from all different kinds of people. And some people from the other communities were really kind of shocked, like, how can you be this way? It's all the hippies. And we're like, it's not. It's really the way things are supposed to be. And I love that my kids were able to go to school with kids from all different places in the world, all different social economic backgrounds. They come to my house, my kids go there, and it really does not matter. And that is a gem. And you have to make this and maintain this a place for everyone. So you were wonderful in doing that. And that, I don't know anywhere else in the country where really it has that way, but people can come here, and when they live in a house that might be subsidized or affordable living, it doesn't look terrible. You go, oh yeah, that's where those people live. So it's wonderful, and I think we will keep that here in Reston. It is a beauty and a treasure that we have.
I agree with all of that, and frankly, I moved to the south side, back to the south side of Reston, and live on Glade Drive, and when I drive to work, as soon as I cross over Reston Parkway, I go through that little microcosm of sort of that little bit of brilliance. I think that this really great little piece of planning where the idea was that people working at USGS, you could have the senior managers there off like Freetown Drive, you could have the sort of middle managers in the townhouses just down there, you could have the more entry-level workers in the condos and apartments that are right there. It was actually planned for diversity. It isn't just people said nice things and diversity happened. It was actually planned for diversity to happen. And so you really have to have a conscious effort to make that happen. And certainly the county has, as part of the master plan, wording that says when you build new apartment complexes, a certain percentage of it has to be workforce and affordable housing. And there's actually wording in that. But you need to actually make it happen. And you need to have those opportunities to really have that diversity. And my wife, who again also grew up in Reston, she's a counselor at South Lakes, and they were going through some meetings, going through some sort of the school being sort of introspective and looking at its mission and vision and stuff. And the facilitators who came and were talking with them had a question for my wife and some of the people there and said, how is it that everyone we talk to at all levels in the school, they always talk about how diversity is such an asset? This is the first school we've ever been to where everyone is on board saying that the diversity is an asset. How do you make that happen? And this actually, literally, she was telling me this afternoon, that diversity as an asset is something that is really valued by the people who come back here, the people who come here. And I think that certainly is a really important thing. It's part of the how it was designed and still really reflected in how the people really are.
I've kind of had an epiphany sitting here listening to these guys in the last few minutes that, you know how often people talk about people, that there's just this thing about Reston and people are good people and they look out for each other literally and figuratively, and it's just this kind of this thing that we can't quite put a name to. And part of me just was thinking, I wonder how much of that is because of the perspective we're constantly given, because of those with whom we live and work. You know, I have 514 students at Terracet, and I have children who I give a brand new coat to every single day because they come in this weather without coats or without proper shoes or whatever. And the perspective of the breadth of human beings is always with us here in Reston. And so it almost lends itself to the goodness of people, because that perspective is never far. You can't go through much more than a half a day or 3/4 of a day without thinking, gosh, you know, I've been blessed with a lot, and by nature I should be giving to those who don't, because they're right here next to me. So that's kind of a philosophical way of answering the question, that I hope that the affordable housing stays, because I think it plays a part, a very clear part in why, in that Reston thing that we all know and experience and live and are appreciative of.
Thank you, and I thank the panel. What you have touched upon relates very directly with the next three questions that we have, because it talks about, it gets at the issue of community culture. And Paul and Katie especially mentioned there's a community culture here that we're all. I'm sorry, I'm trying to look and react to them. But what I was saying is that Reston has a community culture that seems to be resounding in all of the responses that you all have given thus far. And one of the things that has happened in Reston that doesn't happen in other communities is the legal requirements for housing. That it is now encoded in the laws of Fairfax County that certain kinds of housing will be available in all community, and developers are well aware of that when they come into the community. In fact, I often wonder as I drive down Reston Parkway and I see the new high-rises going up, and they tell me that they're $1 million townhouses on the 3rd floor, or co-ops or whatever. And I say, well, where are the poor folks going to be in that? And I wonder about that, think about it. But let's go on to the next question. Growing up in Reston, were you aware of the diversity in the community, and how did you respond to that?
And actually, when I was growing up, I probably wasn't aware of it, because I just thought it was the way it was. And then when I went to college is when I realized, and I moved away for 4 years for undergraduate school and 2 years for graduate school. I went to University of Virginia and University of South Carolina, and that's when I realized just how special my experience in Reston was, and that it wasn't necessarily the way that it just always is. I learned that when I went to school, and then I learned that a little bit at my other job. I work in Loudoun County, and I would go out a lot to the schools in Loudoun County, in different areas of Loudoun County, and then I really realized just how different Reston is, and I valued it that much more. When I was growing up, it's just the way it was. We talk about cultural diversity. I mean, I knew people from everywhere, and it wasn't something that I thought was atypical. And again, for my children, I think that's so important. My daycare provider, when my kids were infants, she's from Sri Lanka. Our next door neighbors are straight from Germany. 2 doors down, one's from Sweden and one's from Greece. It's diversity like you can't even, we're such an international community, and you forget about, I mean, it's incredible what we have here in Reston, and I hope that it stays that way, because I want my kids to think that that's the way it should be too, because they're not going to realize it either until they move away. And again, I hope it makes them want to move back selfishly, because this is where I'm going to be.
Was I aware of? Yes, I was very aware of cultural diversity as a youth. With one of the neighborhoods that I grew up in, we had quite a few, like, basically the UN in our neighborhood. And then also, when I was younger, I also remember going to Nyeri, Kenya, as a part of a sister city program that Reston had in Nyeri, and meeting with, and also 2 men from Nyeri, Kenya, it's just a small town, but anyway, they came, prior to that, they came and stayed at our home, and the 2 men also had children that were my age, so we became pen pals, and this is, this all stemmed from living in Reston, and what was the second part of the question? I think that, yeah, definitely the diversity scenario has changed. I think it's, it's expanded. I mean, as an African American growing up in Reston, I think there might have been 5 African Americans in my, until I got to Langston Hughes. So at this point, I think I'm sure there are more in the elementary schools and so forth. And which I believe is a good thing. I mean, we all, this is how we grow, this is how we evolve by, developing tolerance and developing compassion for everybody, regardless of, anything that's, sort of material.
I kind of had an aha moment when we were talking there, and I was thinking my situation might be a little different. Just want to share a little bit. I grew up in a military family. I can say I have my mom here tonight. My dad was one of the first African American naval officers. So that meant when I grew up, and I'm not telling you my age, when I moved around every 2 years, we were often the only African American family in naval officers' housing wherever we went. Mostly in the Northeast, so we had very good public schools around it, so it was really neat, but it was me, my brother and sister, and a few other kids. So when I came to Reston as a teenager and saw that, now the diversity, South Lakes wasn't built, so Herndon High School is where we all went. To see the diversity, there was African American, white, there were actually, when I graduated, like 3 Hispanic kids in Herndon High School. But the diversity that I saw when I came to Reston, not more African Americans and other people, but the diversity within African Americans as well. I grew up and I knew the diversity amongst Anglo-American people, but to be in Reston, what you get in Reston that most kids do not get, not just only in Reston, but in the rest of the world, that you see African Americans that are very much like the Cosby family. To many people, that's an anomaly. There are wealthy African Americans, there are well-educated African Americans, there are African Americans who own homes. They all don't just live in apartments and all, and that's a reality that most people don't see. So that's a diversity that Reston offers all of its residents, all the people that visit here, and those of us who live here. Most people don't see that. The kids want to Reston, they go someplace else. My African American friends, they had what I had, whatever the level is. You don't see that in other places. So for many people that come to Reston, I can speak for, at least for my family and some of my other African American friends and Hispanic friends from here, and white friends, that you see just not the diversity in socioeconomically, but racially, you see it across the board. And that's really important because some people just, when they see certain groups of people, they put them in a box. Like all the African Americans in Reston do not live in the subsidized housing. All the Hispanics, and that's what Reston kind of cuts across that border and offers. So for me coming here as a teenager, to walk into a high school and see lots of other African American kids, that a lot of them had their parents owned homes, they went to college, that was neat, it was cool, and I belonged. Not that I didn't belong in other places, but I belonged, and it wasn't different. My white friends treated the same, my African American friends, you were a Restonian. We more had the battle between, we were Restonians and other people lived in Herndon. That was the battle then. It wasn't along racial lines. If you lived in Reston, you were cool. So this is special, and that's, it was better to be from Reston at that time. So, I love that I had that opportunity, because it made me be really a stronger person. My parents always taught me to be open, but that is something that's really important, and I think people don't think about it, but you see the whole gamut. And there are a lot of people like that. That's why many people come to Reston and say, I want to make this my home. I can live and just be who I am. I'm not put into a box. I think I've talked.
Actually, you took a lot of the thoughts right out of my mind. Though I've had a lot of different experiences relative to diversity in Reston. At Hunter's Woods in the 70s, I could probably name just about every African, every black, frankly, I was brought up black, I'll die black. I could probably name every black family in Hunter's Woods Elementary School, and there wasn't that many of them, frankly, at Hunter's Woods. Herndon Middle was a little different than in South Lakes. It was a whole different ballgame, right? Because we were pulling from a bigger geographic area, and that was much more diverse. Though still, we had that, like I said, we had the educated and very successful, very academically oriented black population, and just all sorts of different types of black people. It wasn't just, black and white, uneducated and the educated. It was much more of a mix. Though, I've got to say, in all of my AP classes, if I had to take every AP class I took combined, I think that the total number of black people, all of them might have been two. Since Morton Bellamy went to Phillips Andover instead of going to South Lakes High School, he took the other one with him, right? He was in, right? Morton Bellamy would have been there with me, but he went to Phillips. And so there was a lack of diversity very often in the classes around me, but there still was sort of diversity that you could see. But now, and needless to say, at Hunter's Woods, a lot of Western European families, Western European descendant families. My kids now are at Sunrise Valley, and my daughter is, and in her class, she might have 5 classmates where both parents are white and have English as their first language. Maybe. Because there are other black kids, there are Asian kids, there are kids who are, where their parents are off the boat Russian or Eastern European or from Africa. They don't even think about the idea of being mixed race. It's not even a thing. It's just, you've got 2 parents. One has more melanin than the other. It's not even an issue. And so I think that the diversity has really kicked it up a notch. Like, so we didn't have a lot of Hispanic or even Asian people at South Lakes, I'll say. So certainly diversity has gotten much more impressive.
I noticed it growing up because I moved from McLean. No, I'm kidding. But I didn't really need to say anymore. But we literally, moved from McLean and moved to Reston. And my aunt had lived in Reston forever. But we would just go to her house for Thanksgiving and holidays, and we didn't hang out in the neighborhoods. So when we moved to Reston, we very quickly became friends with all different kinds of people who looked very different from those people in McLean. And I remember taking a friend, we still go to church in McLean, and so we took, my older brother became very good friends with Toby Robinson, who's now an international opera singer. You know that Toby Robinson? Carl Robinson. And we brought brought him to church with us and to sing in the choir one day. And we walked down the middle aisle of the sanctuary for choir practice, and all of these McLean children were like, and reacted very negatively. And we didn't know how to react to them, except we just kept marching down the middle of the aisle, and we went and sat down. And this seems like a world ago, but it was definitely not. And so we came home and got in the car with Mom, and we talked with Toby, and we said, you gotta come back, man, you gotta come back, we gotta do this again. And sure enough, we had to acculturate these McLean folks to what we had learned instantaneously when we moved to Reston. And for that, I am so thankful. I think about that all the time, what a difference I have and what a blessing I was given by way of coming here. I also must have recognized it because I was I chose the senior gift to South Lakes High School as a senior, and the gift that we gave back to the school was we made the main hall like a Hall of Nations, and we polled the direct descendant countries of our families there, and we had to buy 94 flags. I'll never forget it. And we lined the main hall with that. That was before the renovation. So I must have recognized it, and I think it's now in my soul, which is why I talk about it and live it all the time.
I just want to add one thing to that, because Lindsay was talking about the South Lakes High School. If you haven't been there recently, you really should go in there and visit. My kids just graduated a few years ago, but there are so many kids from South Lakes at my house all the time. One time a friend came over who did not live in Reston. She goes, "Oh my God, this is like the United Nations." And I said, yeah, apparently there were at the time 78 different languages spoken from the students that attend South Lakes. So it's really neat. You learn a lot just from the kids that live in Reston.
Thank you very much. The panel, I'd like to alert you now that I'm going to switch to the last two questions. Because I think you've touched upon some of the issues and some of the concerns in the community, or positive aspects of the community. But I want to ask, switching the question, how important are the 7 founding principles of Reston that Simon brought to bear in planning this community? And which of these would you prioritize going forward in the vision of Reston 10, 20, 30 years from now, as you reflect upon it now? And don't ask me to repeat that, I had
And I feel like this is a really hard question because I think they're all so tied to one another, and they're almost equally as important as the next in order to maintain the kind of neighborhood and community that we've been talking about. But to answer the first part of that question, I think they're extremely important, obviously, because we've been talking all night about how influential this community was in shaping us as we were growing up. And all of that came down to those 7 principles, if you think about it. And I don't know if I could prioritize just one. The reason that I moved back here is for each and every one of them. There is no place like it to be able to have all of the cultural and recreational activities that we have here, to be able to live and work here, and now I'm living the dream because I'm doing that. To be able to, like it says, live in a single neighborhood throughout your entire life again, that is my goal. And I'll be able to have done it from birth, which is exciting. I only live a quarter of a mile from the house I grew up in. My children go to the same elementary school I went to, and I think that a lot of us can say the same thing. And I think that that's really rare. And the reason for that are those founding principles and the importance that at least I think the people in this panel obviously place on them, and hopefully residents that come in the future will also place on them. So I think that's the challenge. We have all of these new residents coming in and making them aware of all of this, because they didn't grow up here and they maybe don't know how to pinpoint exactly why Reston is as special as it is. And I think maybe that's our responsibility moving forward, is to make sure that everybody knows why, and to be able to be custodians of those principles.